Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on people, personalities and productivity. And perhaps one P word that may be missing there for some is problems. However, most problems are challenges and we will reduce them to that as we go through this. So just a bit of housekeeping first. Everybody's on mute and I want to check that you can do two things. One is if you could see the control panel that you have there, the little icon for hands up. If you could put your hands up if you can hear my voice, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, we've got sufficient hands up to know that my audio is working. Anyone who may have a problem, they want to check their own settings, or if they've dialed in, they should use the PIN number on the audio. Okay, second hands up. Can everybody see my screen? It should have people, productivity, etc. Terrific, thank you. So let's begin. As you're all on mute, I will take questions. If you enter the questions in the question box, I'll refer to it from time to time. If I can deal with your question quickly, I will. Or if I think it's something I need to either unmute you or have a discussion with you offline, I will get back to you on all questions. Thank you. So, where do we begin with people? Well, effective people management is the way that you can leverage your business to wherever you want to bring it to. You'll be the successful leader that people want to follow if you get your leverage right and your delegation right. So what we're going to learn here today is why your delegation may not be working, what to do to fix it, how to ensure you get more from your people by being a leader and a manager, not a dictator. You'll also become aware as you go through this from some of the stories that if you don't do these things, your frustration is going to continue. Your long hours at work will also continue. Staff turnover will be a problem. Now, two of our famous innovators, Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, both got kicked out of the businesses they had started shortly after they had them up and running. And that was because they couldn't manage the people. Years later, in both cases, when they returned, they had learned to do it a lot better. So I'm going to teach you some of these things today, and if you stick around to the end, I'll tell you how you can actually bring your learnings to a higher level and get more information. Now, I'm doing this because I found out the hard way how it works. I started an accountancy practice a long time ago. Nearly 40 years. And I was very successful until I hired people. Because what I did was I hired people who didn't do it my way. And then I'd have to work all hours of the day and night to fix up the problems which I was blaming on them. Now, at the same time, I did something else. I got married. So in the middle of all this, I had a practice with two staff who weren't doing anything I wanted to do, and I just got married. I was a nervous wreck. I was no good to anyone. And as you can see, by the way, I was a lot younger at the time. That's me, a long time ago, I think. Then one of my clients, who knew my staff and knew me, had a word in my ear that shattered my delusion that I was the best boss in the world. I learned from him the principle that you only get paid once for doing the job, so do it right the first time. And that's an important thing in delegation. Otherwise, we'll end up fixing up problems continuously. So I took on a partner who came from a commercial background. Now, Eddie McGovern was a management accountant with GEC, and he had been trained to a degree in managing people. Together, we redesigned the procedures in the practice, and that resulted in happier staff and more satisfied clients. And one of the other delusions I had was that everybody wanted to deal with me. So I had to learn to trust the people that I wanted to trust me. When we did these things, a few things happened. My health my wealth and my attitude improved with the results we got. The practice quickly grew and became a business. And I sold out about a year after I moved to Australia. It still exists in Ireland with my name, and one of the trainee accountants I hired is the managing partner. So I applied the lessons. I don't know who you are, but you can tell me. I applied the lessons I learned the hard way in every business that I've had since. I don't know what that means. Success has always come to me from the... I learned the hard way. That's my phone. Siri's wants to join the seminar. You haven't registered, so you can't join in. Anyway, success has always come from the teams I've had, and I want to share this with you because I want you to learn it the easy way. I don't want you to go through the pain I had to go through. Now, in business, mistakes cost money, and we can always get over that. But the reality is that in war, they cost a lot more than money. This book is up here for a reason. Many people struggle with what I'm going to show today, and they believe that the old business of commanding is managing. Well, it's not. And the story of US generals from the Second World War through the Korean War and the Vietnam Wars is a lesson on what happens when you go with that command strategy. It actually can cost lives. So it costs a lot of lives in war and it costs a lot of money in business. So what happens is we start a business and we get it going and we bring it to a stage, as I did in that accountancy practice, where we need to do a lot more work to get it to the next stage. So the question then arises, who's going to do all the work? Who's going to answer the phone? Who's going to do the paperwork, etc., etc. And from my perspective, you've got three choices. The first one is you can do it all yourself. You can work harder. You'll end up like the guy here on the hamster wheel. You'll end up with less time, eventually less money. Now, what you could do in certain situations, you could do what we call the practice model, where you charge higher prices, you become unique. So if you're a brain surgeon or an entertainer, you might be able to do that. You can also improve your processes, or you can just go back to being self-employed. So that's the first choice. I'm presuming you're here today. That's not an option you want to look at. The second choice is you can use robots. Now, robots are coming, they're here. They can be used in certain situations, but not for all roles or industries. But the message here is you need to automate where you can. Back in that accountancy practice again, back 1980 I think it was, I bought my first, what I thought was a computer, but in fact it was an accounting machine. It cost £10,000 at the time, which was an absolute fortune. We got a lot of raised eyebrows from other accountants when they heard about this. But that machine paid for itself in 12 months with the extra work we were going to put through. So we could move staff from doing a lot of manual, having to enter information, to automation. The third choice you're going to have is to use people. So this is the classic structure. One man's in charge of a team or a business, and he's got people working for them. Learning how to manage these people and leverage through delegation is the key to success. And every time you hit a ceiling of growth, you've got to do the exercise again. You've got to hire more people, create more teams. Now, at this stage, I'd just like to get a feeling of, before we go into some of the detail, in where your thinking is or where you are at the moment. So there's a little poll. Can you see the poll? I'd like you to complete what applies to you. I'll give you about half a minute to enter your answers. Okay, give you another 15 seconds. Okay, thank you for that. Everyone's participated, which is really excellent. So I'll give you the results. 50% of people want to improve their productivity, and that's of their staff. 50% want to resolve conflict between staff members, 50% delegation skills, and 60% communicating effectively with staff. Training other people is 20%. Thank you for that. So you go and you hire these other people, and then you sit back, you've solved the problem. But in reality, that's when the fun begins. And you've all experienced this. Conflict erupts. People start a fight, and you don't know about it because you fixed the problem and you moved on, you're doing other things. And it's not till you hear from your trusted people in the business or from conversations you overhear that you become aware. Often these things are festering in the background, you don't know about it. I've got two ways of handling this. The first is, if it's just two people involved, I will call them in and I will lay it on the line. I'll say, we have a problem, and the problem we have is that you two are a problem for each other. Now, I don't know what's going on, but you are going to resolve this problem today. And you're going to resolve it, or I'm going to solve it. I'll give you 30 minutes to discuss it with each other, work out where your problems are. I'll be back then, and I'll leave them in my office, and I go off. That has never failed to resolve the problem between two people, because so much of it's based on misunderstandings or he said, she said type of situations. Two guys who worked for me in a retail hardware business, two sales assistants, had this problem all the time. And I became aware of it, and I called them in, and I did exactly what I've described now, and they, within 4 weeks, I heard they went going out socially with each other and their wives. So that's one way to deal with it. The other way is when you got a big group problem, you can call a meeting to deal with it, where you actually get involved, the whole team. Now, what you got to be aware of is that people don't change very quickly. They don't want to change. And this is what you get at those kind of meetings. You get a bun fight. And you're sitting there saying, holy Moses, how do I handle this? It leads to nothing. Now, you got to accept that conflict is inevitable. In fact, conflict, the right kind of conflict, is good. When Jobs and Musk returned to their businesses, they caused conflict, but it was all constructive conflict at that stage. They challenged engineers about doing things. They challenged the board. They did all the right things about growing the business. I've dealt with several clients over the last few years whose way of dealing with conflict is to actually avoid it. And the problems just get bigger and bigger. One client I had, a sales manager, he was in charge of a sales division when he came to me. Our first meeting, excuse me, just as we said it all, I have to take this call. He took this call, and for 20 minutes, I could work out his personality on the phone. The amount of 4-letter words that were used and the tone of voice to his sales rep who had the query was unbelievable. We worked together for about 4 years. Initially, it was just on anger management, but then dealing with conflict. And then we went into the whole thing of delegation. So he ended up, after 4 years, become the national manager, taking over the second division, hiring 4 sales support staff. But at the beginning, he ran an operation which basically went like this. They hired a sales rep, they took him to the office for 3 days, then they said, here's your car, here's the keys, here's your mobile phone, here's your run sheet, you'll hear from us if there's any problems. that just leads to conflict and everybody goes to hide. So the first step you have to do is to actually become self-aware. You have to be aware when you're dealing with people all the time of what your emotional state is, what your physiology is. In other words, are you physically feeling fit? You have to be. And you have to get that awareness up to maximum. Because as I showed in that slide earlier on, they aren't going to change. So you're going to have to. And one of the ways we can only change is by being actually aware of how we feel. After we become aware of how we feel, we've then got to focus on how we look to others. And we can't change what we can't see. So if we're going along with our head in the sand, we don't have any chance of changing anything. We need to get some honest feedback. Now, you can get feedback from people as to how you come across in a number of different ways. You could use a 360 report where you get reports on people at your level in the business. You could get reports from your boss, and you get reports from the people who report to you and your suppliers and customers. Second way you can do it is you can actually do behavioral assessments, for example, Myers-Briggs, DISC, extended DISC, things like that. The next thing you do is ask a friend to how you come across. And if none of those work, ask your life partner. I have no doubt they'll be very honest with you. So getting that survey done is actually very important because, again, we become deluded. I had it again at that accountancy practice. Even after we improved things, about 2 years later, we got in a management accountant. He just interviewed the staff, and what came back about the partners meant that we all had to lift our game. Now, I don't want it to be seen that this is a thing of focusing on what we're bad at, because to be an effective leader and delegator, you've also got to know your strengths as well as your weaknesses. We spend too much time in business focusing on our weaknesses. We have this I'm not good enough feeling that comes in when we focus on our weaknesses. The people who focus on their strengths become very successful. Again, referring to Jobs and Musk, and also to people like the two Kerrys, Kerry Packer and Kerry Stokes. They were very good at picking the right people at the right times. So had to manage their people and do all the mundane parts of the business so they could actually grow. Now, one of my strengths, I believe, is being able to get people to go the extra yard. When we were in the financial planning business, at the start of what became known as the GFC, a girl resigned, and my initial thoughts were to just replace her with someone I'd hired through Seek. I thought about it overnight and said, well, we've got to wait and see what the markets are going to do. Because the last thing you want to do is hire somebody and then have to put them off because of the business downturn. So I called in the other staff, explained the problem to them, and said, if you could find ways to deal with Sarah's work between you for a short period of time until we see can we, get over this hiccup we're having, there's what I call a subjective bonus in it for you. I'm not going to say what it's going to be, but I will look after you. I was away for the following week, came back, and between automation and doing things different ways, they basically delivered all her work, and including giving some jobs to me that they thought I should do. And the upshot of that was that we never replaced Sarah. So we saved $60,000 ever after. So knowing yourself, you're then going to know others. And we've all been in this role, or actually both roles. We've all been the person that we feel people don't get us, and we perform the role of head in the sand. Now, when people feel we get them, they want to do more for us. You just think of the people who got you at different stages when you were working in jobs where you could actually do more, and how much extra you went for those people. So armed with the self-awareness that you need to consciously understand the staff you're going to rely on, you got to learn to trust other people, because that's how the leverage starts. Now, when you buy a house, you generally get a bank loan, and that's where you leverage. And leveraging through people is the exact same process. Excuse me a minute. So understanding is where it starts. Now, understanding is the antidote for judgment. By that we mean that when we judge people, it's because we don't understand why they do certain things. We've all been driving in traffic where we've seen a driver do something and say, why did they drive like that? Why did they do this? Why did they do that? But when people feel they're trusted, the law of reciprocation sets in. When you understand people, it creates that atmosphere for trust to build. In Stephen M. R. Covey's book, The Speed of Trust, he talks about the risk of trust. And his research is that not trusting people is a greater risk than actually trusting. Not trusting people is the greater risk. So many people I deal with in business have this idea at the beginning that you can't trust anyone. You got to do it yourself, or everybody's going to rip you off. Understanding is the key. I was in an office yesterday where the manager, who's also the business owner, was upset with an assistant he hired 3 months ago. And what he was upset about was the fact that this person went to the bathroom every hour, hour and a half. And I asked him, had he considered what could be at play? He said, they must be just lazy when they need to go to the bathroom. I said, well, have you considered they may have a medical condition? I said, oh, no, I haven't. I said, well, did you speak to him? He said, yeah, I spoke to him, but he just said it was the heat. He was drinking too much water. This guy, it took half an hour yesterday to get this manager, business owner, to understand there was a reason why the guy was going to the bathroom. We all do things that people don't understand us for. You've got to really understand what it is that motivates your staff and what's going on. Now, getting to know your own staff, getting to know what they can do is great, and building up trust. But before you give them a task, you've got to be very clear about one thing. You've got to identify, have they got any gaps? Now, I'm talking about gaps in their skills, their training, or the resources they might need to do the job. Identifying those needs is crucial before you start actually delegation. So let's talk about delegation now. I'll just check in for a moment, make sure we got no questions. Hang on one minute. Okay, no, I'll deal with that later. So delegation includes outsourcing, and we've got to apply the principles to outsourcing, and that includes offshoring, no matter what country. There are people we're delegating to. So let's talk about the key principles. Excuse me, just. The first item is we must have an agenda for every discussion. If possible, communicate the agenda to people beforehand. There's times where it's not appropriate, but we should always have an agenda. Be very clear about what precisely you are delegating. Be comfortable that the person can do the task effectively. That means that don't assume anything. Now, there are different levels of what we call task relevant maturity. There are people who can do the whole job from start to finish without any help. There's people who could be new to you who will need some training or some assistance along the way. So you need to decide what their skill levels are before you give them the task. The next thing to do is explain the task to them and ask them to read it back to you, just like a good waiter will do in a restaurant. Now, I've had a rule for a long, long time, many, many years, that when someone who's working for me comes to a meeting, they must bring in a notebook. And I get them to write down what it is we've agreed they're going to do and get them to read it back to me. Now, there have been many, many times that what's read back to me is not what I said. There's also been many, many times what was read back to me is not what I thought I said. So that problem about being clear about what you're delegating and getting them to read it back to you is the way we avoid this problem. What's also very important is to explain the importance of the task and what it contributes to. There are many, many things we ask people to do that can be mundane, boring, even tedious. But when people understand what it's contributing to in the bigger picture, they're a lot more motivated to help you. The next thing we need to do is get a new mouse, sorry. Both you and they need to be clear how the outcome will be measured. So in other words, if a task has got a financial component to it, well, that's obviously going to be the measure. Or if it's a time component, or if it's to set up an event, what it will look like. Very important to use positive language with presuppositions. Now, positive language most people understand. Presuppositions is purely language we use that takes away doubt. So for example, if I say to somebody working for me, when you get that task finished, we will then go out to lunch. I'm instilling the confidence that they'll be able to complete it. I'm not making any judgment other than to say I know it will be completed. So I'm setting the expectation. And I'm presuming that they will get it done and we will have lunch. So the presuppositions are that there's someone else involved, there's a task to be done, and that it will be completed, and that we will have lunch. You can't use the words, if you have any problems, come back to me, because they will come back to you. Or you can't use the words, if you get this done, because that presupposes that there's a possibility that they'll fail. So trust in them and transmitting that trust and being confident in them is a huge part of making sure that they get it done on time. And most importantly, you must set a start date as well as a finish date. There's so many people, you give them a task, you tell them you want this draft of a brochure on Friday the 23rd or the 24th, whatever day it is. They'll go away, put it in their diary. On the Thursday, the day before, they'll say, oh, crikey, I'll have to get going with this. So only your people are upskilled and able to manage the time very well. Always ask them what date are they going to start it and what date are they going to finish it, and actually set the date for them if you're in any doubt. Now once we've given them the task, we then got to set up the follow-up. The first thing we do is we put it in a diary. We got points of progress. So I've got to have something with me going to Sydney on Wednesday morning that somebody's working on for me, I'll be checking with them tomorrow. Even though I told them I don't want it until Tuesday, I don't need it till Tuesday, I'm going to check with them tomorrow to see how they're going with it. Discuss problems with them, but let them make the decisions. So when you check in with people, how the job's going, if they raise problems, the answer is, so what do you think you should do about it? Don't let them give you the problem. What sometimes happens is they appeal to our ego and say, I'm not really sure what to do about this, it's a bit complicated, da 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 da. And because we're busy, we say something like, okay, leave it with me and I'll talk to you about it again tomorrow. What's happened there is actually reverse delegation. We've allowed them to give us the problem back. And during this process, remember that delegation is not abdication. We still have responsibility for the result. They're just responsible for the task, which is probably part of a whole range of other things going on with your life at the moment. So giving it to them and then blaming them because it's not done, that's abdication. When the task is finished, give praise for satisfactory and timely completion. Now, a lot of business people and managers spend time checking what people are doing wrong. I'm suggesting that we need to get out there and catch people doing something right. When we go to a restaurant or coffee shop, we often get poor or just, adequate service, and we still tip. And yet our employees, the people who help us to succeed, we don't give them enough acknowledgement. So they're the key principles. Now, practice makes perfect. And what we've got to do is learn more and practice heaps. The picture here is of a kid with a basketball getting advice from his coach. And as we know with sport, we practice a lot. But just remember the whole model of learning, where we move, just think of how you learned how to drive. Many of you will know this example. When you're a child of 8 or 9 years of age, you can't drive, and you're unconsciously incompetent about driving. But then when you move to your early teens, you start thinking about driving. You are consciously incompetent. So you go and you take driving lessons, you pass your driving test and you get experience. Then you're consciously competent. And then a year or two later, you get used to it. It's just second nature to you, and you're unconsciously competent. It's the same with learning people skills and how to deal with people. And it's the same with learning with delegation. Now, where do you go from here? Well, there's plenty of books, courses, etc. out there. What I hope you've learned from today is that you're going to stay frustrated by staff not performing, low productivity. You're going to continue to lose a whole heap of time from infighting and conflict. We're showing you some ways to do it. But the change starts with you. And you need to understand them before you can manage them. And you need to get a process established that you're comfortable, that's easy for you to remember, to delegate and to monitor what's delegated and outsourced. Now, I've got to be honest with you, what I'm talking about here, I know is not for everybody. There are people who, for various reasons, don't want to learn. But there are 4 stages or 4 states that we're all in when it comes to learning new things. And they are, the first is we are blissfully unaware. We didn't know that any of this stuff was even necessary or useful, or we've heard it and we're completely resistant to it. We don't want to change. Or we know we might want to change at some fuzzy point in the future, in the distant future. But we can't really decide when. Or we may be at a stage we want to formulate a plan. Or we may be at a stage we are ready to act now. I'd like to chat to anyone who wants to know, who's at any stage where they want to talk more about this. And the simple way to do it, in the question box, if you just enter the word chat, and I'll arrange to give you a call. We'll have a coffee or a Skype or a call, whatever you're comfortable with, and see how you might take this to another level. So we're near the end now, and I just want to go and check the questions again. No, we don't seem to have any more questions. No. Okay, so that's all you need to do. If you want to hear from me, enter the word chat in the chat box. I'll be in touch with you, and I thank you very much for all showing up here today. Thank you.